The iron chair, a throne made for suffering, not royalty. Medieval records from Europe describe a strange device known as the iron chair. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary seat, but it was covered with hundreds of sharp iron spikes, protruding from the back, the seat, and even the armrests. Once a prisoner was forced onto it, they were strapped down with iron clamps, making escape impossible. The chair was sometimes heated from below, turning the entire object into a scorching prison of metal. To the medieval mind, the iron chair was more than punishment. It was meant to humiliate and to display authority, a chilling symbol of power. The condemned person's fate became a public spectacle, as citizens were allowed to witness their suffering. It served as both deterrent and theater, a reminder that crime against rulers came with unimaginable consequences. The chair's design was so grotesque, it still appears in old illustrations and museum reconstructions today. It remains a haunting image of how medieval justice could turn an everyday object, a chair, into a nightmare. The drunkard's cloak, a punishment that turned shame into a public parade. In parts of 17th century Europe, those guilty of drunkenness were not fined or imprisoned. Instead, they were forced to wear a heavy wooden barrel with holes cut for the head and arms. This device, known as the drunkard's cloak, transformed the offender into a walking spectacle. With the barrel strapped around their body, they were paraded through town streets for all to see. The cloak was not meant to physically torture, but to ridicule. The weight of the barrel was exhausting, the inability to move freely humiliating, and the laughter of neighbors the harshest punishment of all. In a society where reputation was everything, being seen stumbling through the streets in such a ridiculous contraption was a lasting stain. This odd form of justice reflected a time when shame was often considered more powerful than pain. Public humiliation was a way to reinforce moral order, ensuring that the offender's disgrace became a lesson to the entire community. Even centuries later, the image of the drunkard's cloak reminds us of how punishment could be designed not just to correct behavior, but to strip away dignity.
The scold's bridle, a cage of iron for the mouth and mind. Across medieval Britain and parts of Europe, women accused of gossip, nagging, or speaking out too boldly were subjected to the scold's bridle. This bizarre device was an iron framework fitted tightly over the head, with a flat plate that pressed down on the tongue or wedged into the mouth. Once locked in place, it silenced the wearer completely. The punishment was not hidden away in private. The bound woman was often led through town, displayed before neighbors and strangers alike. The bridle was both a tool of humiliation and a warning, enforcing strict ideas of obedience and silence. In some cases, small bells were attached, ringing loudly with every step, so that everyone nearby would turn to look. The scold's bridle reflected a world where speech itself could be judged as criminal and where social order was defended by public shaming. It turned the human face into a spectacle of control, transforming words into something dangerous. Today, museum examples of these iron masks remain chilling symbols of a society where silence was forced upon those who dared to speak too much. The breaking wheel, a punishment where justice was stretched across the spokes. In medieval Europe, one of the most dreaded punishments was the breaking wheel. This massive wooden cartwheel was laid flat, and the condemned was tied across its spokes. Then, using heavy iron bars, the executioner struck the limbs, breaking bones one after another. The victim was left bound on the wheel, their body twisted and immobilized, displayed high on a post for all to see. To the medieval mind, the wheel symbolized fate and divine judgment. Life was imagined as a turning wheel, and so this punishment became a grim reflection of destiny itself. Townspeople gathered to witness the event, not only as punishment, but as public theater, a ritual of fear that reinforced the ruler's power. Legends claim that some were left alive for hours or even days, watched over by crowds as their suffering was turned into a warning. In some regions, the wheel even carried spiritual symbolism, representing the eternal cycle of sin and consequence. Though it vanished from justice systems long ago, the image of the breaking wheel remains one of the most haunting examples of medieval imagination,
blending punishment with symbolism.
The pillory, a wooden frame that trapped not just the body, but reputation. Throughout medieval Europe, criminals often faced the pillory, a device made of heavy wooden boards with holes cut for the head and hands. Once locked inside, the offender stood immobile in a public square, unable to move or defend themselves. The true punishment came not from the wood itself, but from the crowd that gathered around. Passers-by jeered, mocked, and hurled rotten food, mud, or insults at the trapped figure. For hours, sometimes days, the person endured ridicule under the watchful eyes of neighbors, merchants, and even children. Unlike secret punishments hidden behind dungeon walls, the pillory transformed justice into a social event, reinforcing community morals through spectacle. The humiliation was lasting. In towns where reputation meant survival, being seen in the pillory branded someone as untrustworthy, even after release. The wooden frame, simple in design, became one of the most effective tools of control, not by breaking bones, but by breaking pride. Today, old pillories still stand in European town squares, silent reminders of an age when shame was carved into the very architecture of justice. The sack of snakes, a punishment where fear itself was the executioner. Medieval chronicles describe a grim practice known as the sack of snakes. A condemned person was sewn inside a large sack along with venomous animals, often snakes, but sometimes other creatures like toads or scorpions. Once tied shut, the sack was thrown into a river, leaving the victim trapped in darkness, surrounded by hissing and movement. The origins of this punishment go back to ancient Rome, where it was called pona culi, a penalty reserved for those who committed parricide, the killing of one's own parent. By the Middle Ages, echoes of this ritual resurfaced in Europe, remembered as a punishment reserved for crimes that shook the natural order. The sack itself became a symbol of erasure. To be sealed inside meant being cut off from light, breath, and society. Whether the snakes killed swiftly or panic claimed the victim first, the horror lay in the imagination of what was happening inside. The sack of snakes blurred the line between human justice and primal fear. It demonstrated how medieval punishments often relied on symbolism as much as physical suffering, turning nature itself into an instrument of judgment.
The Spanish donkey, a wooden wedge that turned discipline into torment. Similar to the wooden horse, the Spanish donkey was a punishment that forced the condemned to straddle a sharp, triangular beam. Unlike its simpler cousin, this device was taller and more severe, with the rider often hoisted up so their feet could not touch the ground. Weights were sometimes tied to the ankles, pulling the body down harder against the narrow edge. This punishment was not hidden away. It was carried out in open squares or military camps where onlookers could watch the condemned balance in pain. The Spanish donkey was used against soldiers accused of desertion, heretics, and those charged with moral crimes. Its design was brutally symbolic. What looked like riding a donkey became an act of public humiliation, where the body itself became the performance. The wedge was not meant to kill instantly. Its power lay in endurance, in making a prisoner's suffering a long, visible warning. To medieval societies, it reinforced the message that disobedience would lead not only to pain, but to shame and mockery. The Spanish donkey remains one of the most infamous symbols of how imagination could twist something ordinary into a device of fear.
The Brazen Bull, an idol of bronze that turned punishment into spectacle. Originating in ancient Greece but remembered in medieval lore, the Brazen Bull was a hollow metal statue shaped like a bull. Prisoners were placed inside, and a fire was lit beneath. As the bronze heated, the victim's cries echoed through pipes in the bull's head, transformed into sounds like an animal's roar. To spectators, it appeared as though the statue itself had come alive, bellowing in fury. Though its earliest accounts come from the tyrant Phalaris of Sicily, later centuries repeated the story as a warning of cruelty disguised as invention. Medieval storytellers described the Brazen Bull as both punishment and theater, a blend of execution and performance meant to terrify audiences. The symbolism was powerful. The bull represented strength, sacrifice, and divine judgment, while the victim's voice was twisted into something inhuman. Whether all details were real or partly legend, the Brazen Bull became one of history's most infamous punishments, a device that blurred the line between justice and ritual. Today, it endures as a chilling image, a sculpture not admired in temples or palaces, but remembered as a vessel of fear.